Hi, everyone. Thanks to those who have joined. I'm Camille Kempell, Business Development Director at Hive, joined by the wonderful Kate Philpot, VP of Global Sales Enablement at Getty Images. How are you today, Kate?
I'm very well. I'm not going to lie. I'm glad it's Friday.
Yes, same. I've definitely got the Friday feels. I'll be cracking open a bottle of wine after a hectic week. Very much deserved. Great. So we're here to chat about imposter syndrome, specifically in women and how that affects women in sales. I think it's a really interesting subject. It's something that we've seen a lot of data and a lot of stats on, and women consistently score higher on measures of imposter syndrome. For those not too familiar with the term, it's essentially a continuous frustration and anxiety around not feeling good enough. It can be experienced in the workplace and in other parts of your life as well. And then often the fears that come alongside imposter syndrome are that fear of being exposed as incompetent, that people will know that you're not doing a good job or think you're not doing a good job. And as a result, it can mean that women in particular engage in overworking. They can become very stressed and very anxious. What is your experience of imposter syndrome, Kate?
I think, like many people in my early career, there were certainly moments where I doubted myself. I think, with the benefit of experience, that maybe dissipates a little. But I think it is, it's a truth for most of us that imposter syndrome, or at least, if imposter syndrome means wanting to make sure that you show up and give the best of yourself, is what we all experience. And I know it does show up disproportionately for women, but I think there's a lot of men to whom this applies as well.
Yeah, totally agree. I read something interesting about how whilst men struggle with imposter syndrome as well, of course, that it can often present in slightly different ways. So whether that comes to things like if you're looking at a particularly challenging task, what a lot of men would do with a challenging task is they just will avoid it or they won't do it. Whereas women would kind of look at that task and be very critical, be very self-doubtful, overwork to try and get it done. So I think that approach can mean that there's a different impact of imposter syndrome in men and women, which I found quite interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah. So why do you think that imposter syndrome is common amongst women and why they struggle with it in that sense? Have you got any thoughts and reflections on that?
Oh, goodness. I think a lot of it starts from probably early childhood and education, where, some of these standards, ways of behaving are set.
Yeah, so true.
There's a lot to unpack, I think, about the way girls and boys, or whatever the gender assignation is, from an education standpoint, are treated by their teachers. I think that does influence it to a great extent. I think as you progress out of education into employment, the kind of people that you have as your managers also then influences how you present, what the level of self-belief that you have in your capabilities. For example, if you've got a manager who tends to the more critical, then of course, I guess it's, would not be surprising for you to have, for that to impact how you think about yourself and the confidence that you have in yourself. Whereas if you have a manager who encourages you, obviously within reason, to make mistakes, to fail, because failing, out of failure we learn, then that actually will build your confidence, and it will make it easier for you then to take maybe calculated risks as you progress in your career.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's really interesting what you said just a moment ago about how actually from an early age we experience that. I think women are very much socialized to be modest and avoid risk. There's a really interesting TED talk by Rashma Saujani where she talks about how girls, yes, the one I'm speaking about, girls are taught to be quite modest and risk averse, whereas boys are taught to be brave. And we need to flip that very much on its head and teach girls to be brave.
Yeah, and maybe just think about what we mean by brave. So it's not necessarily knocking down walls or tearing up trees. It's about trusting your voice, And even if you do feel afraid, maybe that's too strong a word, if you feel uncomfortable about speaking up, know that probably everybody else in that room, whether it's virtual for real, feels similarly, or at least did at some point in their career, and do it anyway. Anyway, that's the saying, isn't it? Feel the fear, do it anyway. Yes. And I think that part is so important, because once you've done it once, the second time you do it, it's slightly less frightening, and the third time you do it, maybe slightly less frightening again. I mean, there are other things I think that you can do to build your confidence, but part of it is just pushing yourself into a place of slight discomfort, to feel what that feels like.
Yeah. And we had an interesting conversation, Kate, when we were discussing this live, about how, alongside women struggling in this kind of area, actually women of colour, LGBTQIA plus women, women with disabilities can face those additional biases and make it even more challenging to overcome imposter syndrome.
Yeah, because it's proven that, people at the intersections are disproportionately disadvantaged. So you've got women, and then you have women who are, as I say, in those other groups that, it is challenging, because part of what gives you confidence is, for example, walking into a room and seeing other people who look like you. And if you walk into a room, or you enter a virtual room, and there's nobody who looks like you, by definition, it shouldn't be surprising that, you may feel a little bit on the back foot. And actually, that's why it's so important that anybody who professes to be an ally plays their part in welcoming you into that space. So for example, if that's a meeting room and there are, the vast majority are white and probably male, some of those men could do a better job of including, by asking for opinions, the people who are in a minority, and it doesn't happen often enough.
Have you seen any good examples of initiatives that support giving women of colour, etc., a great platform to be able to grow and develop within their career successfully?
There are many. There's women in tech. So, for example, from our world is content, but it's a technological delivery in most cases. Content is delivered to customers digitally, and therefore we are tangentially a tech organization. And so there's women in tech, there's Black women in tech, there is Black Rise. There are many organizations where you will find your community. What that doesn't necessarily, and they're probably in many of the organizations that people watching this will be working for, there'll be employee resource groups. And again, those will be areas of community. For example, we have them at Getty Images, where both for women and for people of color and for people with disabilities and chronic illnesses, and people from the LGBTQIA plus community, those are all spaces where people can go and talk and share stories that probably the majority of people would not experience. And just having that support network gives you, again, that extra layer of confidence, so that when you go back to your day job, you actually feel like you can, not take on the world necessarily, but certainly take on the challenges, rise to the challenges that you might be facing.
For sure. And I think, there's so much conversation around how we can flip the script on self-doubt, and top tips and strategies that you can implement, and, things that you can do to build your own confidence. And I think there's definitely things that can help people with that. But in reality, I do think that we should be telling companies it is primarily their responsibility to try and break down any senses of imposter syndrome in all employees, but when we're looking at women in particular, paying them fairly, offering enhanced childcare benefits so that doesn't become a blocker to their career development, those sorts of things.
I think it's probably, for me, to decouple a couple, those things. So number one, imposter syndrome. Number two, barriers to progression in organizations. Then I don't think they're necessarily connected. I think there are certainly overlaps and intersections. Many of the reasons why women don't progress vertically in organizations are not anything to do with them. They are to do with the fact that they want to take time out to have children, and the organizations for whom they work don't easily facilitate that. So whether the maternity leave is long enough, whether it's flexible enough, whether it's, you know, leave that they can be shared between the woman and the partner, whether they are, you know, whether they have to go and, you know, survive on statutory maternity pay, those are all barriers to, you know, to being able to progress. Whether they want to take a career break, what happens when they come back? Does that mean that their career is completely stalled? Has the business moved on? Have they been completely left behind? Things like that, I think organizations can do a far better job of.
Yeah,
for sure. I think imposter syndrome shows up, or for some of the reasons that we've talked about, at all levels, and is not necessarily connected to, you know, maternity and parenting. And obviously there are many different ways of being a parent. I think coming back into the workplace after a break for any reason can exacerbate those feelings of, oh, I don't feel confident because, you know, they've left me behind, and now, you know, goodness knows what's happened in the intervening period, and how do I catch up? For sure, that can be exacerbated. But I think that, you know, the way in which you can address your imposter syndrome, I mean, for me, the most important thing is always prepare the hell out of whatever it is that I'm doing. You know, what gives you confidence is knowing your subject, knowing your topic, whether that's a presentation, whether it's something that you just want to raise in front of other people. Do your homework so that you are optimally prepared. And actually, that's something that, you know, women and girls from a very early age are really good at. You know, from if you think back to the education system, the reason why statistically, and I don't know if this is still the case, but it was, girls do better at continuous assessment is that they are very prepared. They do their homework, and that can carry through into education. You know, where I have always fallen flat on my face is where I've tried to wing it. I don't try and wing it anymore because it doesn't work for me. I know it does for some, you know, and you do you if that's the case. But I think for most of us, being super well prepared is definitely one way of helping to counter that imposter syndrome.
So,
and then
where you're over preparing, and, you know, when you make sure that you've done a huge amount of work to fight those feelings of imposter syndrome, how can you ensure that you're not on a slippery slope of dealing with heightened stress, heightened anxiety? How do you manage those feelings when you're working to try and kind of tackle that in the way that you've explained there?
I think another thing to do is practice. So, you know, before, if it's important enough, and I say this to, you know, the people that we train all the time, if it's important enough, practice. Don't let the first time that you deliver your messages be in that really important scenario where you need it to be a success.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think there are many speakers or presenters out there who would rock up to an important presentation having not done a run through of that presentation before they turn up.
Yeah.
And the same applies, you know, the time that you invest in that practice will never not be useful.
Yeah.
So I think that's really vital. And then there are other things that you can do, you know, mindfulness techniques, breathing techniques, just to calm your breathing down, so that when you move into, let's say it's a formal presentation, so that you are in control of yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
And those kind of things, super, super helpful.
Yeah.
And I mean, the practice part is critical. I mean, for anybody who's listening who uses things like PowerPoint, I mean, there's now an AI rehearsing tool that you can use where you can walk through your presentation. It will give you feedback. It says you're going too fast, you're going too slow, you use too many ums and ahs. And okay, it's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. If if you can't actually go and practice present to a human, which would, to me, be always the best option.
I've recently moved into my business development role, having previously been in the accounts team, and definitely, you know, had some feelings of imposter syndrome. And so I've been really working on how I'm reframing those thoughts and working on more self-compassion. And I have to say that the practice element, I think, is so helpful. I've been using a tool that we've developed at Hive that can help me kind of role play more difficult, challenging scenarios and conversations before I then go into them, where it's the more kind of like complex sales and negotiation and that type of thing. And that's been incredibly helpful. And I think the other thing that's really working for me is logging my little my accomplishments and logging my little achievements, as big and small as they may be, and then reviewing it at times where, you know, your headspace feels a little off, and thinking about what you've done so far, and, you know, the progress that you've made.
Completely agree. And actually, in our business of late, we're doing a lot more role playing than we ever have done. And again, you know, I'm not going to lie, there are a lot of people who go, please don't make me do a role play. to which my response is, where would you rather practice? Here, in front of your friends, or would you like the first time you have this conversation to be in front of a customer when it really, really matters? And provided you do those role playing scenarios in a low risk, non-judgmental environment, there is everything to be gained, and I think nothing to lose. And you know, to your point about the little bits of good stuff, Erin on my team has what she calls a sunshine folder, where she puts all of that stuff for those. I know, I love it too. I haven't got one myself. Nice. I plan always to build one, and that's where she goes whenever she's having a bad day.
Yeah. And I think another place that I'm sure many people may also go to is a WhatsApp group with friends. Can always be quite helpful for giving you that bit of a rain check, and, you know,
always offload.
Women who are going to really support you and celebrate your wins. I think, there's definitely a lot of power in that.
Very much so.
Fab. And so I think, you know, the other part that we were interested in chatting about today was how women in particular can move from that sort of middle management up to leadership. So, you know, kind of looking more specifically here about women who want to progress and are, you know, working towards that. How, I suppose any examples from your experience? How have you done that in your career?
Yeah. Well, I was very lucky. My first job was at a company called Mars Confectionery, and they used to call it raising your profile. And as you progress through the organization, it was expected that you would work, as well as doing the day job, that if you wanted to progress, you had a responsibility to work on raising your profile, basically, so people know who you are. And I think, again, for women, that can feel really uncomfortable, because none of us are particularly comfortable blowing our trumpet. And I, you know, at the time, and I've since spoken to, you know, colleagues who in many cases are actually pretty senior in where they are, feeling that you had to do it because it was the way to get noticed never felt comfortable. And for me, I found it useful to reframe it as, my job is to help the senior people in this organization understand what's happening at the coalface. Why? Because they need to make the best possible decisions that they can make, and they don't always have time to be at the coalface. And so seeing it as my job is just to update them made it feel a lot less uncomfortable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's
and I think that has always been a really useful thing for me to do. I am the last person who enjoys talking about myself, but I am happy to talk about my work so far as I think it's useful to others, and it helps them to make better decisions. I think the other things that I have really benefited from over the years, actually probably more A than B, mentorship and sponsorship.
Definitely, yeah.
So, you know, finding a mentor, and it doesn't only have to be one. You can have as many as you've got the capacity to, you know, to talk to, and obviously who have the bandwidth to be your mentor. I think that's a really important thing, and pick people doing the kind of job that you would like to be doing at some point in the future, so that you can find out from them, what did you do? What decisions did you make? What was your career trajectory? I guarantee it's not always completely vertical. What did you learn? What would you do if you were me? And what would your recommended next step be? That's a really important piece. And then the sponsor, which is, you know, it's nuanced, but it's different. Your sponsor is somebody who says, yes, I believe in you, and I am going to make it my business to open doors for you to move either through this organization or into others. And I think that's a really important I don't know how much time we've got left, but, you know, maybe a final point is, if you're not moving at the pace that you expect in the business that you work in right now, don't feel that you have to stay.
Yeah, so true.
You know, you can develop your career in lots of different organizations, and there will be one who sees your potential, who sees the value that you could bring to them, and in which you can thrive, you know. And I think, yeah, I would always say, don't be afraid to leave.
Yes, yeah. And I think make sure that you build your network as well. I think that's so important, and perhaps even more so in sales, but definitely for everyone. And surrounding yourself with a great community of people who uplift you, inspire you, you know, that really motivate you. And I think that's a really great point on, you know, reaching out to those people who are in a great top position, asking them how they did it, what are their top tips.
Yeah.
And I suppose it's also worth pointing out that your mentors and your sponsors, they don't need to just be women, they can be men as well.
Absolutely not. In fact, none of my mentors or sponsors have been women. They've all been men, and, you know, and have been real allies. And I mean, some of them I'm still in contact with 25 years on from when I first started working. So yes, you know, the gender is irrelevant. It's more to do with, do they see you? Do they genuinely see you in all of however you show up, and do they see that as something that they can, you know, that, or you as somebody that they can help to achieve their goals?
Definitely. I love that. Well, I think it's probably time for us to wrap up. That's really flown by. But
It really has.
Just before we do, any kind of final tips? You know, what are your conclusions here? What can people take away from how they can tackle imposter syndrome and how they can build their career?
I think two things are probably going back to where we started. Number one, assume everybody feels a degree of imposter syndrome, even the ones that are claiming that they don't. Number two, you know, the better prepared you are, the more likely you are to be able to overcome the worst feelings of imposter syndrome. And then number three, whatever you feel, part of this, and certainly when it comes to progression, is about pushing yourself through that place of discomfort and doing it anyway, because once you've done it, it will feel a lot less uncomfortable the second and the third and hopefully the fourth and fifth times.
Fab. And just a final one to add to that, create a sunshine folder. Obsessed.
Yes.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Kate, and thanks to those
You're welcome, Camille.
Joined us on a Friday. Great to see you. Have a lovely weekend, and we'll catch up soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.